Good evening and welcome to the Alexandria Transit Company Board of Directors December meeting. I want to thank the staff for providing us a lovely spread tonight and making this as festive as possible, and to wish all of you happy holidays and a wonderful new year, and hope you get some time to enjoy with your families. We're going to start with public comment, and I'm going to read a statement that the board adopted a couple of months ago that now opens up our public. Oh, we've called the roll first. Madam Secretary.
Chair Kaplan.
Here.
Vice Chair Kleist.
Here.
Linda Bailey. Brandy Collins.
Here.
Kendall Taylor.
Here.
Matt Harris.
Here.
Hillary Orr. Ajayesha Thomas. Murat Omey. Jesse O'Connell.
Here.
Okay, Chair Kaplan, you have a quorum. Those absent are Ajayesha Thomas and Linda Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And Linda and Ajayesha both indicated that they would need excused absences tonight. And I'll just note, I know Jesse needs to leave at 6:45 to go to another meeting. He wanted to make sure we all knew that. So let me read the statement for public comment, and then we'll go ahead and recognize any speakers first in the room, and then we will ask if there's anyone on the Zoom who wants to be recognized. We are about to convene into the public comment period of our meeting. All dashboard meetings include a public comment period at the beginning of the meeting, as we believe it is crucial for us to hear from our riders and community members. The board is here to listen. However, please keep in mind that public comment is not designed to be a discussion. Accordingly, please do not expect the board to respond to your concerns or questions tonight. We take any concerns and questions seriously and need sufficient time to process and research any issues if need be. Board members will respond to your questions and concerns at a future meeting or have the proper staff member get back to you at the appropriate time. Please note that personnel matters are not a part of public comment period. However, please know we take any personnel questions seriously. You are asked to contact the Dash administration with any such concerns. We ask that all speakers and members of the audience maintain civility and respect for any divergent views that others possess. Further, we ask that speakers please address their comments to the board directly rather than the audience. The board will take pre-registered speakers first, and they will invite others who wish to speak who may not have pre-registered. For future meetings, you may pre-register on the website dashbus.com on the Board of Directors page. I will now call the first speaker. Please remember each speaker is allotted 3 minutes for your comments. If you're speaking on behalf of the Neighborhood Civic Association or Unit Owners Association, please identify yourself accordingly to be recognized for 5 minutes. So staff has told me we have no speakers who have pre-registered, so I will first ask if there's anybody in the room who would like to be recognized. Not seeing anyone. And you indicated there is a person on Zoom who would like to be recognized?
Yes, Mr. Chair. We have Jim Durham has raised his hand to present, and it would appear that he has now been enabled to speak.
All right, Jim, welcome. So you can follow along. I know you've spoken before. You follow along with the green, yellow, and red lights for your 3 minutes.
Right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, Mr. Chairman and board members. I want to thank Dash for putting out its fare free report. I'm speaking tonight as a member of the Partnership for Healthier Alexandria volunteer group that supports public health initiatives in Alexandria. And one of those initiatives strategy areas is to remove barriers to Dash ridership. And so the fare free program was really something we had set out a couple of years ago to pursue, and we're glad to see it got implemented, glad to see the report. And again, I won't expect an answer tonight, but I did note the overcrowding, and I also want to express the appreciation for the mitigation measures that Dash has taken using larger buses and also extra buses. And I would hope that has addressed the problem, but from the way the report reads, it sounds like it's mitigated it somewhat, but not completely. If there's any further discussion of that, that'd be great to hear. And also, as board members probably know, there is a shortage of bus drivers overall in the city for both Dash and ACPS. And I know general manager has been proactive in engaging ACPS, and when it's appropriate, if there's any information on whether or not there's any efficiencies from that partnership or that engagement with ACPS. It'd be great to hear about that. But overall, my main reason for speaking tonight is thank you for the program, both the higher frequency service and fare free, and thanks for the report. And if there's any additional information on either the overcrowding situation associated with serving the high school or the engagement with the high school on efficiencies. Appreciate that at any future time. Thank you very much. Ken, great job.
Thank you, Jim. I know Martin will speak to that report tonight, and so that's an area we'll ask him to address. Are there any other speakers on Zoom who wish to be recognized?
Anyone on the Zoom, you can raise your hand. And if not, no other hands are up.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Thank you. We'll now move into the approval of the minutes. We have 2 minutes in this packet. We had our November 9th regular meeting and then the November 30th special meeting that we held entirely virtually. We can take those up as a block motion unless there are changes or revisions to any of the minutes, or if anybody wishes to vote separately on either of them.
Mr. Chair, I wasn't here for all the special meetings, so I think we should probably just do them separately. if
And
that's all right.
Randy saying the same thing. Okay, so we'll ask for motion on November 9th.
So moved.
Moved by Matt. Is there a second? Second, Steve. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Abstain from November 9th. Okay. November 30th, is there a motion? Moved by Steve. Is there a second?
Second.
Jesse? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, Matt has abstained. Thank you. Although you were present November 30th for most of it. Well, I do want to, actually, after you left, I did make a comment that, Matt, you became the first person, I believe, in the ATC's history to attend a transit board meeting while riding transit, because we watched you walking through transit stations on multiple trains and, yeah. Oh, okay. Well, we're still going to give you credit for it. I was impressed at least. So I knew it wasn't your living room. I could tell that pretty quickly. So, okay, the minutes stand approved. On the chair's report, the only item I have is to take up the possible revision to our bylaws. And so I discussed this a little bit at the last meeting. I know several of you weren't here. Brandy and I had a little bit of discussion in advance of tonight's meeting. I know Kendall wasn't here, so this will be new to her. But let me just recap, and it'll be a good refresher for all of us. So the bylaws change that we're considering is whether we want to go back to having a fixed number of board members. So, and we gave you all the bylaws actually in your packet, as well as just, especially for those who are new and where applicants may not have recognized what actually goes into having a recruitment for a board member. So I gave you the kind of timeline that we used the last time we recruited. So just some quick history on this. When Dash was created, I believe the board was 5 members. It was quickly changed to 7, which mirrors what city council is. And that was the size of the board when I joined. There were 6 citizen members and 1 city staff. In 2013, the board was expanded to 9 to give city staff 2 additional seats. So there are 3 city staff members as there are now. And then and the citizen number remained the same. In 2020, we had brought candidates forward for board vacancies. So we were standing at 9 with 6 citizens, and we had brought forward 2 citizen members for appointment to council. Council was concerned about areas of underrepresentation on our board. At that point, the fact that we wouldn't have any women on that board, they sat those candidates. And so the way council decided to address that was to increase the size of our board to allow for 2 additional members so they could seat the members we wanted, get us back to 9, and then asked us to recruit again. And that's the recruitment in which Linda Bailey and Ajacia Thomas were selected that summer. The way council wrote that bylaws change as the stockholders was to say that the board shall be between 9 and 11 members, which would mean 6 to 8 citizen members. And there was one carve out for a citizen member, which is that we have at least one person who's an expert in transportation. And we have several people on our board who meet that criterion among the citizen members. So when we recruited again this spring, it had been my intention to bring us back down to 9, because I have thought that a smaller board, having been on it when it was 7 and then being on it when it was 9 and then 11, worked better than a larger board. So we went in to recruit only to get us back to 9 when we hit 8. Matt, and I hope don't mind me sharing this, had approached me and said, I'm taking a new job right around the time we had started the recruitment, and had said, I may need to step off the board because I'm not sure if this is going to be able to work for me. And so at that point, I thought we might end up with 2 vacancies. So instead of the selection committee that brought on Jesse and Murat had originally been instructed just bring us 1 candidate, we said, let's bring 2 instead. We didn't really have any discussion as a board about it. It was a discussion Matt and I had, and then I kind of communicated that to the committee, which was headed up by Steve. And so, but then I had some second thoughts about that and said, well, this is kind of uncharted territory for us. I probably shouldn't be the one deciding what size board we are. This is a question that should come to the entire board. And so we had finalists that were brought forward, and I asked the board to first decide how many of them you wanted to seat. The committee had recommended the appointment of 2, although there was a split vote on one of the candidates. And I said, well, okay, we could appoint all 3 if that is the direction of the board. So if you remember at a meeting in the spring, we had a vote where we first decided how many members do you want to sit, and then which candidates do you want to seat, and that's how we got Jesse and Murat on the board. When we went to council to have them appointed, I was asked a question by Councilman Aguirre specifically about kind of how that process worked. And so I explained what I just shared with all of you, and that this was new for us. And I said, well, one way we could address this is to go back to a fixed number of citizen members on the board. And then that way, if it's 9, 10, or 11, we just know anytime we get under that number, we do a recruitment. So we would lose some of the flexibility that we have with what we have now, but the board wouldn't be in the position of having to decide every time we do a recruitment, okay, how do we want to fill this? And are there questions then about kind of the fairness if we're making that decision once we have the candidates? So the time to have that discussion is now, because in February, we'll have the annual stockholders meeting, and that's where any bylaws changes have to go forward to council. And so we need to give staff direction about, do we want to leave it the way it is? Or do we want to say we're going to be a 9-member board with 6 citizen members, a 10-member board with 7 citizen members, or an 11-member board with 8 citizen members? So that is what we need to decide tonight. And so I welcome your feedback. I don't have as I say, I see pros and cons to both approaches. So I'm not coming with a specific recommendation. It's really up to all of you. So I will open the floor.
Mr. Chair, at the time I was in favor of expanding the board because I thought all 3 candidates were really good. But I think a fixed rate at I'm throwing out there 9 is good just because it's odd. And those are all my comments.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so we could decide as a board that we think 9 is the right number, but not have to change the bylaws. We could keep the flexibility in the bylaws. Is that correct? And then just kind of decide, and then if somebody leaves, decide before we recruit, just confirm that we're recruiting for 1 person. But just keep the flexibility to not have to deal with changing the bylaws, and allow us, if we have that, there's going to be overlap for a couple months and we know somebody's leaving, to be able to do this, because those recruitments are time consuming. So to have that flexibility, I think, is helpful. But as a board, we could agree on a general number, and then leaving the flexibility in case we need it is nice.
We could. I was concerned that that there might have been some concerns about the fairness of how we did that last time. And so we could decide before we set up the selection committee that regardless of how many good candidates, if I only bring us 1, that's fine. And maybe that was just the issue of the fact that then we kind of changed midway through and then didn't get the consensus of the board. But yeah, that would be a way to do it. And just if we were to go down to 9, we're not going to kick anybody off the board tonight. We would do it when we lose a member the next time. So if anyone's worried, well, Micah's still going to have a seat on this board. Yes, you will. As long as you want to serve.
I'm not leaving at 6:45 anymore. I've changed my mind.
So, okay.
So I take Hillary's point. I do think flexibility is good. I think the argument for like a fixed number is to the extent that we are always conscious of the relationship between us as a board and our stockholders. Like, could there be a future situation where the stockholders insist that we go to 11 through their capacity as stockholders? Whereas if we change the bylaws to say it's a 9-person board, that ambiguity is removed, right? It's sort of like making our composition more determinative of our preferences as opposed to an external, future council wants to put 2 people that they like on the board and push us to go to 11, It
could work out that way because I mean, the stockholders typically take it's, we sort of work like a corporate board where, you know, if you own stock in a company, they send you a proxy and they say, here are our nominees. And that's the way we do it, which sometimes, especially new council members, is confusing because they're used to having ultimate selection over and consideration of all the candidates. You're right that, yeah, if we have a fixed number, they would be less inclined to tinker with that, although they did once, which is how we then got to 11. So they could change it even if we don't bring forward a bylaws change, but I suspect they would be less likely to do that and probably would have an easier way of responding than to other members who lobby for them to be more active in the process. So yeah, I think there's definitely some we could have more control over the process if we were to go to a fixed number. That's true. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, and the issues that we experienced during the last recruitment, I think are in large part as a result of the unclear direction that the group had moving into it. So having said that, I think if we agree of a fixed number, and let's say that number is 9, we go into the recruitment action with looking for 1 person or 2 people to bring it up to the 9. I think that would be an appropriate method to use and allow the selection committee to do justice to their selection process. But at the same time, I think it would be important for us to have, to the extent that we can, control over the composition of the board at a fixed number, and say 9, I think works well.
I hear Matt, Jesse, and Steve for fixed number, Hillary arguing for flexibility, but us basically saying at the outset how we would proceed. Others? Brand?
Yeah, I side with Hillary. I think flexibility is great, particularly when you raise the example where Ajacia and Linda were selected. There may be a time on the board when we think, oh, well, we might need more representation from this particular group of people, and having the flexibility will allow the board to add people who in interest who may be missing from the board at that time. And that can change from point to point.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kendall?
Just to add to that, not just flexibility in it, but if there's an expertise we might want down the line, that there's 2 seats available to find us something that we might be looking for down the line.
Okay. All right. So I've got now Hillary, Kendall, Brandy, and Faye. It's interesting, broke down with the staff that way, all wanting a flexibility. And okay. Because I mean, status quo can be fine. I'm hearing that is either fine with most members, or those who the fixed number can, like me, are just sort of like, well, I could see it both ways. But Murat.
I mean, I have to say something. That's how I feel. But I think the expertise is a good reason to have the flexibility, because times change and conditions change, and obviously we're not privy to know anything about what's going to happen. The pandemic was a good example of that. So in those kind of situations, having a little bit of flexibility would probably help us to go through those times. But obviously we can't base business decisions on extraordinary circumstances. That's also the other side of the argument. But there's some merit in the keeping it flexible. That's how I see it.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to add one more thing. I mean, on the aspect of flexibility, or who we want to focus in on, I mean, that's the committee's role. If they need diversity or somebody with expertise, that's up to us to make sure we're recruiting the right way. And to Jesse's point, we would lose all the control, or perhaps lose control, if that outside group wants us to, select their own people. And then we're at their mercy and we have no control over who we get on the board. And I think just as a board that deals in transit, we should theoretically know transit better than city council, because we have the subject matter expertise. So, but either way.
Okay. Maybe one of the strongest in terms of a fixed number. How do you feel about if we did continue to leave it the way it was?
There's no, right now, based on the way we're operating, there's no immediate downside. But as Matt just referenced, being told a particular person or persons to bring on board that may not be the expertise that we're looking for, but happens to be the thoughts of the city council, in my mind, doesn't do justice to the purpose and the functionality of the board. I will also say that there is an advantage of having an extra person or two in the mix, say go up to 11, because to bring on another board member, if I recall, that process took at least 2 months. And then again, it's a timing has to go before the city council, before the whole cycle gets closed. So again, my concern is, as I said, is the lack of flexibility of the board to determine its composition to carry out its essential function.
And maybe if council really wants something, then we probably have to, give that to them, because they ultimately control our funding. And if they're confident, if they, for whatever reason, decided, well, I'm not confident in the selections the board has made, we're probably going to end up with that change anyway. They'll find a way to do that, as they did with the existing bylaws without a recommendation. So I think what I'm hearing is that we leave it the way it is, but then we have more direction as a board in terms of what the committee's scope will be. So we will, okay. And I think I can take that to explain that to council at the next stockholders meeting if they ask about it, the outcome of the discussion we had. So thank you for that. All right. Are there others who have reports on other committees or boards that you serve on that would be helpful to bring forward to the group?
Well, I did not do a written TNS report because at the time of the packet, I did not have any news, but I will note that yesterday, I believe the Metro sent out a news release that the Potomac Yard Metro Station is going to be open at the end of May 2023. So we have a date. Hopefully we'll stick to it and get that open. The one other note is that we do have a Duke Street Transitway Advisory Group meeting tomorrow night. We'll probably be taking a break in January from that group while we do a lot of our kind of background analysis and targeted outreach.
Will this be the first meeting where that group will react to the results of the survey that the city did, or have you discussed that with them?
We discussed that at the last meeting.
Okay.
I don't know if you know this or not.
I do not know the answer to that.
All right. Well, that is very good news. And in terms of our service, we are in line with beginning the dash changes that we've already approved with whatever their date is. And I hear Martin nodding. So great. Okay. We'll move into the general manager's report. So Josh, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Give me just a minute to get situated here. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's good to see you. Happy holidays early. As I mentioned before the meeting started, I'm not ready. But I am ready for this meeting, so that's a good thing. I'd like to start my report by welcoming Kristen Tolan, who is the Regional Vice President of First Transit. She would like to share some information with us about an acquisition that is ongoing with First Transit.
I too am not ready for the holidays, so thanks, Josh, for that reminder. Thank you for the opportunity to give you a brief update on where we are. It was announced at the end of October that TransDev had signed an agreement to purchase First Transit. The acquisition itself is highly complementary in terms of the regional presence and solutions offered by both companies. We are similar in size, honestly, and function in the same realms. In the last few weeks, the deal moved into the regulatory process. And at this point, we don't have a target date, but they're thinking the completion could be as early as late February, or it could go beyond the end of February. At this point, until then, First Transit and TransDev continue to operate independently as two separate companies and continuing to provide safe and reliable transit service and management functions. The sale has had no impact so far to our day-to-day operations. We continue to support our customers and bid on new work and continue to serve the communities that we're in now. So that's fairly brief. I will definitely be back once I know more and can give you more information as we move forward. If anybody has any any basic questions I can answer, I'd be happy to do so. Okay, well, happy holidays.
And just for context for the board to know, as you probably are aware, First Transit does have a management services contract here at Dash, and the employees of the workforce are fall under Transit Management Alexandria, which is a sub corporation of First Transit. So I believe I would be accurate in saying all that would just simply transfer, just be a different company name. And I've been in the industry long enough, these acquisitions happen all the time. So not downplaying it. I think it's probably a good thing. You guys are excited about it, but they do happen. So anyway, we'll keep an eye on it and keep you all informed.
So they assume all the contracts.
Okay, so then the next item in my report is a face that you have probably not seen before, or at least not seen frequently. I'd like to welcome to the podium Kevin Hernandez. Kevin is our Director of Operations here at Dash. He is oftentimes dealing with making sure the buses are running, so he's not here listening to us talk. But Kevin recently provided a operations KPI presentation as a part of an ongoing effort internally to focus more on data-driven decision-making at Dash, building dashboards and KPIs and reporting them out to not only internally to departments, but to the public, as you've heard Martin has been working on. One of the things we do is that throughout the year, each department head comes to our senior management team meeting and presents a deep dive on metrics that they identified within their own department that are relevant to what is going on, both within their department and affecting the rest of the organization. And I felt like this would be a great opportunity to give you all just a quick 10, 15-minute look into what happens with operations and operations staffing in particular. You've heard from me a lot that short staffing has been a problem. We, for our first time in history, have been missing trips, and that is obviously not a good thing, but it's helpful to understand the context of kind of what Kevin and his team are dealing with, both from a recruitment and retention standpoint. So Kevin, I will hand you this. Make sure this is turned on. And I will turn it over to you to run through what you have to share.
All right. Good evening, members of the board. Pleasure to meet you all. So I'm going to take you guys through a journey into the world of operations. So I want to start that off with our current staffing levels. So we were budgeted this fiscal year for 178 operators. We currently have 167 operators. So that is a net negative of 11. That is a 6.18% vacancy rate. So just keep that in mind as we progress through the presentation. So this slide here will show us our historical staffing throughout this current year, 2022. The dark blue line are the budgeted positions that we have, and then the light blue line are actuals. So we started the year with a budgeted target of 171 operators. That went up in October to 178 when we started our line 30 improvements. So with the light blue line, we started the year at 157 operators. That is roughly the same number that we started back in September of 2021 when we launched the new network. So we stayed throughout the year with 155 to 160 operators throughout the year. We did lose a couple more operators throughout the summer. We actually went to the lowest at 153 total operators. And then in October, we went to 160 operators, which was our peak in 2021. And I'm happy to say that we are currently at the highest level operators that we've had, at least in my tenure here at Dash, and I think in many of our tenures at Dash, that's probably the highest number. I did want to point out that in the spring, we did launch a brand new training program, which was meant to allow more throughput of trainees into our program. We started seeing more recruitment after that as well. And so you can start seeing the results from end of spring, early summer into the fall, which is why we have that peak now in the fall. So this slide here gives a breakdown of our attrition, our separation. I do want to note that as you go from left to right, it's a running total, it's cumulative. So it's not that you're we had 14 in the middle of the year. So we did have a spike within the late spring into the summer months of separations, and I'll give you a breakdown of how that happened.
Is that an observable seasonal pattern? Do we typically see those in the spring and summer of every year, or is this unique?
We did see that last year as well, but it's unique year to year. So these are the separation reasons that we've had for the past 3 years. So as you can see through the middle category here, resignations, that is our driver of our attrition here at Dash. So we did have 12 here this past year. That is the highest the past 3 years, but we do also see it through terminations, which is related to performance and other personnel issues. And we also do quite a good job with promotions of our internal staff as well. So while that is a reason of having short staffing, it's good to see that we have our staff promoted from within.
Are people retiring or are they just leaving the organization?
Yeah, we do have some retirees. We've had, I believe, 3 since I've been here, retirees, and we do expect a few more. All right, so the reasons for resignation, at least for this past year, the driver that we've had of reasons is family. When we ask why are you leaving us, it's family. They don't want to explain that. Family can mean many things to different drivers. It could be pressures at home. It could be, going back to their home country, things like that. We've had a few medical health. We've had some unknowns. We had 1 retirement this year. 1 person related to school and 1 person related to just the schedule in general. So based on what we saw this year, we were losing about almost 2 operators per month when you look at it on a 12-month scale. And the average tenure this year from all the separations that we had was about 3 years, so 2.9 years. The one thing to note is that out of the 19 total separations we had this year, 12 were from operators that were here only 2 years and below. And I'll explain a little bit more about that, so why we believe that may be the case.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
On the medical health part. Are they given an option to work somewhere else within Dash, maybe? Like if they are not able to drive, like do we have that capacity to make them an offer? Maybe to have maybe they can't stand up for long or they can't sit for a long time. So is there capacity like that or not? Generally.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, I'm not sure what the medical health could have to do with their own or family members, not just their
It's
own.
on their own. It's their own. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, frankly, what we deal with is we tend to have the most vacancies in operations. So we have very little turnover on the administrative side, and on the maintenance side, you tend to run into even more issues than you do with operations because maintenance side is much more physical. So if there's a physical limitation, the light duty work, so to say, is very, very limited unless they move into dispatch, which is where we often see the promotion opportunities happening. So.
Can I ask a question about
Yes.
retirement?
Mhm.
So do you all kind of track how many drivers you have that are getting close to retirement and start doing recruiting early for those drivers? Or do you have a lot per year that are getting to that level?
Oh, I was looking at you. So it's actually something we started seeing between the past year. We started seeing like that pressure is coming. And so, one thing that I told Josh and the rest of our team is that we need to start planning for that. There are a lot of operators who have given their service to Dash that have been here for 20, 30 years, and they're approaching that time. So as you guys may be aware, we had that successful job fair. And so a lot of that influx that we're getting is planning for that for this year and beyond. So I want to provide a little bit of an industry analysis and comparison. A lot of this is coming from APTA. So just to start it off, 96% of 190 agencies reported a workforce shortage in 2022. The top reasons before the pandemic for such a shortage was due to an aging workforce, as we were just talking about, and also just a lack of interest from younger people in transit. Some of the top reasons now, post-pandemic, include a high number of retirements and also low unemployment and the rise of e-commerce. So the younger people are looking at those, those areas of working with package delivery companies, rideshare companies. That's easier thing for them to get into. You also look with the transit world, you have to go to get a CDL. There's a lot of hurdles with that too, as well. Another thing is low pay and the rise of cost of living. Starting salaries are within $19.55 all the way up to $29.61 in the nation's top 7 largest agencies. And then the last thing is also operator safety and assault. So that's been on the rise after the COVID era. Yes.
Does APTA kind of track these trends, sort of the notion of lack of interest from younger people? Are these correlated kind of with all of these agencies moving from defined benefit pension plans over time to not sort of having that kind of give us service, give you a career, but then you sort of retire and have sort of a very good pension?
Yeah, so APTA, at least with this report that they put out earlier this year, about that tracked a lot of that that you're asking about. I can share that.
I can share a personal experience from last month. There was an Uber driver that was actually taking me from the airport home, and we started talking, and I mentioned Dash, and he said that he applied for an operator job here, and then he was going through the process. The pandemic happened, and then I encouraged him to apply because I know that we were on a hiring spree and all that other stuff. But the answer was very aligned with the low interest, and he was like, "Nah, I'm fine driving the Uber. It's much better." So it is validated. Like I validated that personally.
Thank you for that.
And so this is the APTA report that you've got here. So the operator and safety assaults, that's APTA, not Dash.
Correct.
Okay.
So this here gives a breakdown of the salary. So how does Dash compare? So our starting pay rate is $22.57. Locally, this was sourced from some of my peer managers. So DC Circulator starts at $24.50. PRTC OmniRide and Woodbridge and Manassas is $23.14. And then Arlington that runs ART is $21. When you look at the 7 agencies that the Transit Center, which coordinated with APTA, they obtained these starting salaries. So you can see that Dash, in comparison, we're towards the lower middle of that spectrum. I would like to note that we are in our 4th year of our contract with the union. And so a lot of these contracts, such as DC Circulator, it's a brand new contract. So with contracts, we see that trend, towards the end, we start falling a little bit behind, but we shall see how that proceeds on with negotiations.
I have a question. I don't know this so much, so sorry for asking all these, but is the starting pay rate fixed on the entry to Dash or not the experience, right? So you can have 25 years of experience somewhere else. So that's okay.
Yeah, we get that question a lot.
Yeah. Because we didn't see a breakdown of how many entry level operators we have and how many mid-level, how many seniors we have. So I was kind of wondering how that.
You can start to develop a theme in your head as to why the 2 and 3 years in is the highest turnover. There's an awful lot of not great things that when you sign on, it takes a while to develop the higher pay and the better seniority and those kinds of things.
So even though a lot of the jurisdictions around here use First Transit, that does not matter. It's specific to the organization.
Yeah, it's totally independent of the provider. Now, in a situation like a contract operation like DC Circulator, where the contractor is providing the workforce and all of the materials and everything associated with the service, that the negotiation occurs with the contractor. First Trans is at the table with us and is a partner with us, but the ultimate decision on what we do is made locally as opposed to by the contractor in our situation.
Also, each organization has its own negotiating.
That's right.
For the union against the management. So it's going to be all over the board with the caveat that the funds have to be there in the first place.
Yep.
And ours is based on a 7-year scale too. So going to your point about the operators leaving within the first 2-3 years, it takes them 7 years to reach top pay.
So let me just add. I mean, do we give bonuses or retention bonuses or anything like that? And, at any time, any employer can go back to the union and renegotiate higher wages, and there would be no pushback from the union. So, I think we've benefited, and I mean this as an organization, from the fact that we locked in our wages for 4 years. So the collective bargaining agreement has saved us money, not cost us money.
Just was curious about, as we look at total compensation. So I know one of the things when we did our last union contract was a significantly enhanced employer contribution to the 401k. And is there a vesting period for that here? Or does that come into play in decisions? So they're immediately vested in any money that Dash puts into
The vesting period, do we, Edward? What is the time? Do we know?
It increases your percentage with several years. I forget the.
I think it's 4 years. It's 25%, maybe a year. I'd have to look at the contract to know. for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's.
So there's
it's a-
some forfeiture for that, for those operators are looking at some,
Sure.
giving up some
Oh, yeah.
pay. And do we look also then at the total, because just looking at the hourly rate doesn't reflect the total compensation that we're getting. Do we benchmark with, looking at what we contribute to insurance and things like that as we're looking at how competitive we are?
Yes, and I would argue that we are very competitive in the context of, as you'll see in the next couple of
Oh,
slides.
you're going to get to that.
You're going to see that this trend is starting to change because we've been able to get better traction with folks. But to be honest, they're looking at the pay. And we will talk, we spend a lot of time talking with them about the benefits, and I see Kendall nodding, like, it tends to be just about the number when it comes to hiring.
Yeah.
So,
no, I understand.
and, we feel great about what we have to offer, but, so, yeah, you'll see some more insight into how that's sort of starting to change. Yeah.
The wage progression is what again?
It's a seven-year scale,
And is that?
and it shifts up, and you basically go over and up year over year. So the scale adjusts on a percentage basis, and that's different each year. It's around the most recent is 2.75%. And then your next step up in your anniversary is another bump. And those vary as well.
Okay. And is that comparable to the other transit agencies in the area as far as that the duration of the?
It's a little longer. It's a
what I
longer
thought,
scale.
yeah.
7 years is a longer scale, but
Yes.
in negotiations, we went to 7 years from 20. So.
Yeah, but that may explain why we're talking about this now and seeing some of the numbers here.
Right.
Josh,
Okay.
is over the 7, is it kind of front loaded that early on you get the higher bumps, or is it even all the way across, or?
So the changes year over year, the last year is the highest bump. And I'm going from memory here. I can't remember what the exact percentages are where they started. But yes, as you grow in seniority, you see increases. But I would say that you do tend to go up at a pretty hefty rate within a couple of years. But I'll certainly look at that and maybe give you all some more context as to kind of how that plays out. But they tend to be looking when they're coming in the door at what do they start at, and then where do they go from there?
We're going through this at the city with a bunch of other things. And is there a way to design the scale that kind of right before you lose somebody at 3 years or 4 years, do you design the scale so you would like, if you just stay that, extra year, what's that
You're
that
s-
sweet spot?
So
where
you're seeing the
we own
same
your soul after a
short
certain
term,
year?
you're seeing the same turnover at the lower end.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Something like the average employee now stays 4 years or something like that, and
Mm-hmm.
we vest at 5. So our big thing is not interesting to our workforce.
Yeah, interesting.
It's not everybody, but that's the trend is shorter.
Right.
Just two questions. With going from needing 178 and only having 167. First of all, are we going to lose the funding for those difference if we're able to continue to operate short staffed?
Well, that's changing
Well, okay, and then the
as
second
far as
question
our
is,
staffing levels are changing.
I assume that we now have a lot more overtime because making up the difference. And have you costed that out and then compare that to how much it would cost to have an extra bodies here?
Yes. So the short answer is overtime actually is a little bit less expensive because of the benefit, right? But it is costly from the perspective of a workforce fatigue level. And you're going to see that, I think, in the next couple of slides that Kevin has. So we've clearly hit on an interesting subject here. Kevin's like, I've got all these answers, they're coming. Go ahead.
Kevin, I have a question. You may address this later in the PowerPoint presentation, but the 2.5 year average of folks walking out the door, is that just within the last 2.5 years, or is that the traditional time where people leave the organization?
That was this year.
Okay. Because I wonder, I mean, if you looking at when the 2.5 year, when it would have started, it would have been January 2020, right before for the fall before. And then the pandemic happened and a lot of things happened. And I wonder if it's not just the money that's the issue, but there might be cultural issues that have happened in the organization since then. Like maybe people need more flexibility. I'm just wondering if we're like in a unique place in history and that's affecting people's decision-making, and it may not necessarily be the salary as the number one driver of why people have made choices to leave during this time period.
Yeah, high level wise, when I looked at it, a lot of folks left for personal reasons. They left for personal reasons or for family. And they didn't really elaborate on that. They just said that this is a lot of stuff going on at home, COVID, they need me at home, childcare and things like that, that all played into it. So we did see a lot of operators leave us. We tried to keep them, but at the end of the day, the family is going to drive them that decision.
I think that's also probably because the sample size here is so small that it might be more visible from like an after study or something to see if there's a change in the I'm not familiar with folks that are out there.
Yeah, and anecdotally too, a lot of, there's a rise in telework, remote work and stuff like that. So personally, I know a lot of former friends that left the industry for that too. So it could be a little bit of that as well.
And you're not seeing, from what it sounds like, you're not seeing people leave in that 2 to 3 time frame to go to work for, say, WMATA across the Potomac for a higher rate, knowing that they're going to start at the lower bracket of seniority, but it's worth their while working themselves back up to, gain seniority in a company like WMATA that has a higher rate, possibly a different benefit package.
We don't know that for sure.
Okay.
But it wouldn't shock me.
Okay.
Because even at year 3 here, they go to WMATA, they start at 25, which is our year 3. So that, they might want to get that benefit a lot faster if they do that.
Thank
you. Yep. So
Do we know how our rates compare to the school system? And do we have any issues competing with, I know school bus drivers nobody's getting them right now. They're everywhere you look, there's a sign for somebody hiring for those, but I wonder from a competitor standpoint and a pay standpoint, how we would compare.
At least from my knowledge, I know that the school buses start a little bit higher, but they don't offer them the full 40 hours of work year round. So there is that the way pros and cons. All right, so continuing, so this graph here shows our staffing, the percentage of open shifts per pay period, with a portion of them attributable to our vacancies compared to our absences. So high level, what I want you to focus on first is just the total. So you can see that we were around 30% or above. What that means is that 30% or more of shifts were open, were vacant. We had to cover them somehow. Over time, some of my supervision team had to go out there and fill those shifts to move the city. The red graph that you see here are absences. So of that total absence, you can see that when Omicron, we were dealing with that, it spiked to 20% of people not being here due to that reason. You'll see seasonal spikes as well, such as in July, you can see that it spiked again, and that's just for vacations. That's something that we expect. But in terms of the vacancy, you can see that as people were leaving throughout the spring and summer, it also created a compounding effect with our total short staffing. So we were dealing with this from December of last year all the way to now. I will say that it's getting better. As you can see towards the end here, it's dropping significantly. I see your reaction there. Yes, yes. Yeah, so you do see a lot of the operators doing overtime. A lot of that contributes to their absences as well when they're tired, they're fatigued, they're overworked. So that contributes a lot to that as well.
Kevin, can you explain with the schedule bid, why then it seems to go, the vacancy rate seems to go down considerably? And is that because while you do the schedule bids, it appears on a fixed quarterly cycle, but
Yeah.
your training classes had in the past been aligned with when that bid was done? Is that why that number
That's
goes
a
down? or-
good question, actually. We spoke about that in our SMT group. So it seems that the pattern is that when we are approaching a bid, the operators want to be present for that schedule change. They want to be present for, I don't know if you guys have ever seen our bid, but it's a war room in here, just like a draft lottery. It's literally, they all come here and are looking at a screen, selecting their shifts. So they really want to be here for that. And they want to be here that first week to see how their shifts works and also how it aligns with their personal life as well. It's just a random trend that we see. So this here is our staffing challenges. Continued, this chart breaks down our vacant shifts in each pay period, and also with our known and pre-scheduled absences. So pre-scheduled absences include our vacation, advanced sick requests, leave of absences, or just a driver notifying us they won't be here in advance. And this is compares it against same day call off. So this is a driver calling in last minute that they're not coming in. So we can see that our call offs are in red. That spiked towards Omicron. You can see people were calling out for that, but you can also see throughout the summer months, people putting in more requests to be off. So we spiked at 20% at the beginning of the year. But as you can see, we're dealing with about 10 to 15% of total vacant or total open shifts was a result of absences. And like I said, the operators are tired in terms of just fatigue. So we did start seeing a lot of that towards the summer when we were back in full force.
So I would just add, I think this is a really impactful representation of the challenges that they face on a daily basis. These numbers here are showing, as Kevin mentioned, people who already let us know in advance they wouldn't be here for various reasons, be it vacation or approved or unapproved. And then the same day, they just, someone comes in at 4 a.m., they got buses pulling out at 5 and there's 3 messages on the machine, I'm not coming, right? So the red line is those people. The red line is the worst kind of situation you deal with, because as a person in operations, you have to scramble to figure out now what to do, because beyond what you already expected. What I would note is that this is on top of vacancy. So I think the message here that Kevin really helped us to understand is it's not just about not having enough people. This chart ignores that. This is just with the people you have, what's happening, right? So when you think about vacancy, like you're short-staffed, you've got to consider that this is always going to be there. So it sort of stacks. And we don't really show that on this chart, but you can get a sense of kind of how that would compound.
And you can, I guess from an operational perspective, we plan for the blue. Like the day before, we're planning for that blue, but then the red comes in. And we had to scramble that day to figure out how to cover that red. And that's where our challenges came in with, having to ask operators to stay late and calling people in on their off days and things like that. So it's a fun world.
So you don't assume 5% of people are gonna call in?
Yeah, we do have contingencies built in, but even then, with the short staffing, it was.
The industry term is extra board, but our extra board is not staffed because we don't have enough people to begin with. So the extra board would be people who are scheduled to come in and don't have work. Because we know that just like an airline, people aren't going to show up to take their seats. So we have people on standby. Looked like Kendall wanted to.
No, I was interested in that, but is call-offs something that can be tracked as part of performance and used for evaluation purposes?
Yes.
It is, yeah. And that's governed by our CBA as far as the actions associated.
All right, so just brought a summary and key takeaways from this presentation. So we've experienced similar staffing challenges compared to not only our regional partners, but also just on a national level. We struggle with a combination of planned absences, as we mentioned, and also just same-day callouts. We are trending down in both vacancies and absences, but we did experience some spikes around COVID and also some random downtrends around the bid. As I mentioned, driver fatigue is a major contributor to these callouts, especially from this past year that we witnessed. Our driver pay is lagging behind our peers, but it doesn't show to be much of a factor when it comes to recruitment. And we had a sign-on bonus this past year that helped offset a little bit of that as well. Turnover is highest in the first 3 years of employment and is likely attributable to undesirable work schedules and seniority-based overtime and schedule selection requirements in the CVA. Just to elaborate a little bit about that, when you first come in as an operator, you don't have a selection. You will probably get thrown onto the extra board. The extra board is at the mercy of the company in terms of whatever is open is what you will be assigned. That might be early morning one day. The next day, we may need you to come in late at night. It just depends on what it is. Seniority-based overtime, it's literally what it says. So operators can sign up to work overtime, but it's based on seniority. So if you're number 1, you'll get that seniority over operator number 55, for instance. Drivers are twice as likely to leave versus being terminated, and most often they state family reasons for their resignation. Overtime costs are correlated to seasonal trends and absences, and also likely to driver fatigue.
Does the contract give extra pay for shifts that are not desirable?
No.
There's no shift differential. Because that's a way to ameliorate that, seniority bidding. But you have to negotiate it.
Yeah, things to keep in mind.
But it works. I mean, it absolutely works. Yeah, it's a solution.
So just two quick points I want to make. One, this notion of driver fatigue has kind of been woven through this presentation and has shown up on several slides. And to the extent that, persistent fatigue is actually a health challenge that we are then absorbing costs and stuff on the back end on our copays and whatnot. I would be very much interested over time in exploring, are there some investments that we can make that are addressing this issue of driver fatigue that gets us to a more sustainable place in a bunch of different ways long term? Because I think that's the sort of thing where just observing that, acknowledging that it's a reality, but that seems like something worth figuring out the appropriate way to tackle. Second comment, I'm really curious if you can offer some insight into the extent that as we are having challenges staffing for our vacant positions, is the issue that there is sufficient qualified workforce that we are not attracting, or is there not sufficient qualified workforce? And the reason I'm asking is if it's not enough qualified people, that's something that we can address through partnerships with, CDL providers and community colleges and actually try to create more skilled workers. or meet the qualification they're looking for. If it's the other one, that's different, it's a different solution set.
Yeah, so in the beginning of the year, we actually shifted away from only recruiting CDL holders. So we then turned to looking at individuals with permits. That then changed into recruiting individuals without anything. Because that was one of the things
Does that impact our insurance? No.
that was one of the things that yeah, that's one of the things we noted, that we needed to replenish the CDL pool, just in general. And so that's one of the things we started helping provide job offers to individuals without anything and giving them that incentive to go to the DMV, get their permits, and we'll help you get your full license once you're here. So that was one thing that we've started seeing success with that in recruitment.
And just saying this in front of multiple city staff members, I mean, like, this does strike me as an interesting, like, city level initiative. Like, what is the city's aggregate CDL demand? And are we meeting that through, both private providers, community colleges, et cetera? And I just think that's an interesting thing that we could be raising.
So when we're talking about overtime and in the seniority piece, is there so much overtime that the newer drivers are able to get it when they want it? Or is it always snatched up by the drivers with more seniority?
We did have a lot of overtime available, but in that regard, let's say 30 operators signed
Yeah.
up, and the top 15 are here and the bottom 15 are here. They're all gonna get it, but you still have the top 15 that signed up as well.
Yeah.
Is one that gets more competitive, that's when you turn away the least seniority operators, and the seniors get that overtime. And that's something we're starting seeing, especially more as we get more staffing, we start turning away the junior operators from that.
So it sounds like the turnover is because often the shifts are just really challenging. And you have split shifts, don't you? I'm guessing the more
Oh,
junior
yeah.
operators have those.
Yeah, I
split
mean,
shifts and
scheduling can be a real challenge as far as what the desirability is of the work. Yeah, for sure. Before Jesse totally gets out of the room, I just want to point out that we had a really successful job fair, and I know you're on Twitter, so you probably saw that. So we'll talk about that in just a minute too, is how much of an impact that had. Yeah.
I want to ask something. I'm gonna naively presume that you're gonna do something about it, right? These takeaways are something, right? Like, to strategize and tackle these. One thing that, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth one there, driver pay is lagging. But then the conclusions that has not shown to be a factor in recruitment, but I think that it is a factor in retention, right? So that's the overall read that I get from all these points that you guys highlighted is there's a challenge with retention, obviously, right? And there are ways to design, it can be designed in a way, obviously it's going to require negotiations and all that, but what is that break-even point? So when an operator comes to say about like 3 years, when they're known to be leaving around that age, how can the pay, the bumps can be adjusted so that they're at a level that for them to leave for pay would not make sense to go to another agency, right? So if they reach in 3 years, say 26, and then the competitors are at 24, obviously, at least that would reduce the likeliness of them leaving. So that, those are kind of interesting thing. And I know that we have limited time, but I also wanted to ask Ms. Tolan, right? I mean, you are in the industry, so do you experience or do you observe these to be universal, or are they unique to Dash?
You are not unique. It is across the industry. Seeing struggle with recruiting drivers, with driver pay, and as he mentioned, later in the CBA, those are the locations that are struggling a little more. We're seeing in negotiations now, units coming in with double-digit asks for year one, and then maybe overall in a 3-year period, 15% increase. So we'll say 8 in year 1 and 3 in two and 3. They are, it is a struggle, and I think that you mentioned the recruiting people who do not have CDLs and training them, that seems to be the most successful right now. And people do leave, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Some figure out that dealing with the public isn't for them. They go to Amazon. I've heard somewhat commonly going to over the road trucking because they figured out pretty quickly that dealing with people is their strength. It is a challenge. So it's requiring to be creative and deal with driver fatigue and meeting that CSA, the hours rules, and so. Yeah, it's
Thank you for sharing that.
I'd like to brag a little bit on Alexandria and Dash, because I think not only are we a phenomenal place to work, the community is often great to work with. Although we do have our incidents, we always seem to be trying to trend below industry as far as what we're dealing with, as far as, adverse interactions with customers. The biggest thing we're seeing right now is fighting in its students. We don't tend to have the issues, the more city-oriented system, the large city systems, the DC, New York, Chicago, they tend to deal with sort of the more aggressive, kind of very hostile, difficult to deal with population that tends to end up on the buses. Here, we don't seem to see that as much as we see it. The biggest issue right now has been with the students. And that apparently is not unique to on the bus. That's been also off the bus. So, but I would just echo all this. I think everyone's points are great. I would just like to say, while we have Kevin standing up here, I know he wants to sit down, is really to highlight the success of our effort in the job fair. It's not in the packet because it happened on Friday and Saturday, but I was here for that, participated in some of the interviews and never told the interviewees I was a general manager until the end. A couple of them asked and told 2 of them at the end, and they said, "Oh my gosh." I said, well, look, what difference does it make? We're all in this together to figure out how to get the right people here in the door. But we had people lined up outside the door before we even opened. And this looked like a war room. I mean, there were people we had team members in here doing pre-employment screenings. We had the drug screenings happening same day. We had the background checks going. We had the records. And basically you walked in and within, would you say 2 hours? Depending on the time of day, within 2 hours, you were either told you were hired or that we're sorry, it's not a good fit. And so we took the airline approach. We're overbooking. And one of the things that Kevin's team, really accomplished here, along with the entire Dash team, credit to our marketing team, our communications team, HR, finance, everyone came together, the whole organization, to make this happen. We had 53 applicants. What?
On day one?
On day one?
Yeah, we had like 53 people show up.
Yeah,
Or 63
53 people show up, and we have double-digit offer numbers out there. Now, what we've done through that is we've overbooked ourselves. I mean, our first training class has 20 people in it. And if you remember from Kevin's first slide, he doesn't need 20 people. But what we don't talk about here is the training side. And he shows the turnover and attrition of people that are out on revenue service. It's much higher in training. And I think we were seeing a display of, for every 10, we were seeing 2 or 3 come out of that. And then whether they make it during their probationary period, right? So the strategy has now turned to overhire. And I want to give Kevin and the rest of the team members here credit for their efforts in that, because I think that is a really phenomenal step. And I'm hopeful that will actually get us to a point for the first time in my time here to be fully staffed.
Josh and Kevin, I think the strategy you're applying here is a very good one, because I thought I left this problem 15 years ago when I left public transportation. But it's something I live with, and we were, I think, depending upon how you count, is the third largest in the country. We were having attrition rates 75%, 65% on a good training cycle. But I'll say overhiring for these positions, because what seems to be part of the issue is being in the transportation business is a lifestyle. It's not a job, because of the different shifts you need to make yourself available, the weekend work, which in a routine job, people just don't face that. And as much as we try to share what this lifestyle is going to be, most people would say, oh, sure. And then they would never complete training, or if they lasted a year or 2 years, then we figured we'd had them for life. But between the approach you're using now, please do continue that. But I think it might be worthwhile, spent a lot of time on this, but to deal with the salary progression and or some of the other strategies, recognizing every meeting we talk about budget shortfalls, but we don't want to be in the hiring business and the training business. We want to be in the business of providing transportation, and we need solid workforce that we can rely upon. So it would be good to, again, do some follow-up discussion, but no, please do.
I had a big
keep it
takeaway.
going.
Yeah, I had a big takeaway from Kendall tonight. That was you turned on the light in the attic for me about how to identify where the break point is and try to strategically ensure there's something substantial that happens at that point to kind of get them over the hill, so to say. And that will be something I'm going to be really looking to understand.
Let me know if you're successful.
It's a great idea. We'll see if we can make it happen. Sure.
Do you guys have an employee wellness program
Yes.
specifically tailored at the drivers and whatever their special unique needs are?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's uniquely tailored to the drivers. It's more general in sense.
Sorry, thinking about the driver fatigue. I mean, that's something pretty unique that, I wouldn't face in my office job. So maybe there are some special things that they might need to kind of help support them.
Yeah, and that's a tricky slope too, because the folks who've been getting lots of overtime, they're taking home big paychecks. And the more people we bring on, the more rested they are, but also the less money they have. So sometimes it's self-inflicted fatigue. A lot of times these people are actually just overworking themselves because they want that money. Well, if there are no further questions, it's okay, we'll move on, but I want to thank Kevin for being here this evening and sharing this with you all. I hope you found it as interesting as we did on the management team.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so moving right along, the only action item I have here within my reports today is hopefully fairly simple. Included in the packet were 3 different facilitator options for the retreat that's scheduled for February 1. It is a 4-hour retreat. We would anticipate probably providing you lunch. So, start around lunch hour and then hopefully be done pretty quickly in the afternoon in accordance with your availability. I'll give you a high-level summary of this. 2 of the 3 entities on this list I have experience with. So I'll speak first about the one that I do not, and that was GP Strategies. We came across them through the Fairfax County contracts. So we started doing some looking to see who was available on a contractual level. GP, I interviewed actually 2 different facilitators they brought forward, ended up agreeing that one would be a good fit, but in the end, they check all the boxes and I think they would be perfectly competent and capable. However, I do believe that their price is probably too high relative to what I know we can get out of a facilitator that I'm familiar with. So Knoll Training and Consulting is the second one there. That is one I do have familiarity with. Michael Knoll did come and do a retreat with this board a number of years ago. He is a longstanding figure in the transit industry and is a great facilitator. Nothing bad to say about him. Him and his team have a lot of experience. He's also got experience serving on a transit board. And I think would be perfectly suitable. With that said, he is more expensive than Terry Glass, who is through Leadership Solutions, and she is ultimately my recommendation because she has been the most active with Dash in the past couple of years. She has been here working with the team and has been involved with the management team. She also helped co-design and ran the Young Leaders program that we heard such great reviews about. I can speak on a personal level. I've worked with Terry even before Dash, have always been quite impressed with her and utilized her where possible. Her specialty is not necessarily in retreats. Her specialty is more in team building and facilitation, strategic planning, those kinds of things. But what I will say about Terry is that I don't think that that is a negative in the approach of what we're trying to accomplish. We are not going to be doing a strategic plan in 4 hours. You know, this group is not going to be diving into a lot of this detailed sort of technical work. I think the thought that both I and David have had is just that this board hasn't had a time to really get to fully understand each other, learn, although you work really well together, learn some new techniques and some ways to really ensure you're efficient in your role, maybe get some new ideas, walk away with hopefully, you know, some new things in your pocket, right, that you can use as a part of your role as a board member. And I'm quite confident that Terry can do that. Her price is right and her capabilities are right. She does not have as detailed of a proposal as the others, but I did speak with her and mentioned to her that I would be asking that there would be a pre-retreat conversation with each of you to make sure to just have some perspectives going into the conversation. And also I would like to include the DISC tool, which is used here by Dash staff and would also be helpful both for me and I think for each of you. And Terry is quite, she's a certified person in that tool, and that has a lot to do with communication and collaboration techniques. So I'll answer any questions. Like I said, a lot of the material is in there. We've of course have a preliminary agenda that was presented at the September meeting, and the board generally agreed to that. So the program will be designed around that. Again, 4 hours isn't a lot of time to go really deep. So I think if we can just get you all some new things, you know, I think you're willing to give us your time, and we appreciate that. And I would hope that it would benefit you all, help David in his role as chair, and help us as staff to just understand where we focus our priorities and make sure that we're all an effective team. So with that, I'll turn it over to the board for questions or conversation, or you, Mr. Chair, for any of your perspectives.
Yeah, so Josh, my first question was the budget,
Mhm.
because 1 and 2 are pretty close and 3 is far away from the other quotes. So I wanted to know, like, how much what's really reasonable in terms of this effort? And then my second thought or question was, the third candidate didn't provide the agenda as you shared. And I wondered if their budget would allow everything that you had hoped to achieve. And then the last thought I had is I really like number 1's agenda. So I'm glad you mentioned that you wanted to incorporate the DISC, because I thought that was something pretty strong. So if we do go with number 3, I would love for her to include that part of the agenda from number 1's proposal.
Sure, and I appreciate that question. So first, to answer your question about the budget, this will be paid out of our general training, which we use also for the management team trainings. And I consider an acceptable amount in a given day to be $2,500 or less for a facilitated training or workshop kind of thing. And that is what we have typically budgeted for, and that's typically where we stand. So there is flexibility, I think, within the budget to make sure that in the event that we move forward with Terry, that she ensures she does exactly the same things as the others. The DISC tool, we pay, when she's done that for our staff, we're just simply paying the license fee per individual. I don't exactly know what that amount is. It's, you know, it's maybe $25 a person or something. It's not a lot. And so she just funnels that through to us. So her proposal is for her time and labor, and I've talked with her about that. The only thing that wouldn't be included there is that DISC assessment tool, which is going to still keep us well under the budget for this type of work.
Hey, Josh. On the legal concerns, would it be worth bringing Lonnie in for addressing some of these?
So, A couple of proposers brought that up. It wasn't really an agenda, item that I identified as important. And I think you and I have even kind of talked about this on the side. I think we've kind of got things in pretty good shape. I think maybe the thinking there was in the event that there was a legal matter that came to the board as far as a board action, that sort of there was an effect of how to avoid that or how to protect against that. And I think if we got to a point where we needed that, I think Lonnie would be the appropriate resource for that, not this facility.
And the other thing, the agenda, the Public Employee Relations Act, it's not applicable to you all. It's that National Labor Relations Act.
Mhm.
And I mean, I've done that for 25 years, so
Right.
I'm happy to chip in on that if
Yeah.
you need it.
Josh, the first consultant, the GP Strategies, based on what they submitted, and you may have other information that they provided, it looked like they were just going to charge us $7,500 to do a DISC assessment, and thought that was pretty high for that. And maybe they have something else to offer, but it's not indicated by GP Strategies. And the third proposal from Terry Glass, obviously, she lists her background, which is rather extensive, but I didn't see anything as far as an agenda as compared to the second potential contractor who was very specific as far as what they were covered. What can we expect, for example, Terry Glass to produce as compared to the proposal that Knoll Strategies did?
So I spoke with her as well as the other two, and my conversation with her was, here is what the agenda would look like based off the draft that was submitted to the board. And her response was that is completely fine. The feedback I got was it would be helpful once a decision is made, maybe to even have a conversation, and she would be willing to jump on a Zoom during a board meeting just to hear from you all, to make sure that things are tailored appropriately. I think where we struggled, frankly, is that I really just had a draft agenda and kind of said to people, propose to me based off of what you would do with this agenda. And I think because Terry has been here so much, I think she just kind of recognized the amount of time knowing Dash and knowing how to build the agenda. I suspect that's why it was a little bit more general and more broad. It hasn't given me cause for concern, but certainly if it does give the board cause for concern, we're more than happy to go back, confirm that stuff. We still have time. I just wanted to make sure we tonight had a direction of where we generally agreed to go so that I could make sure that everything was aligned for February, since we don't have a lot of time.
It goes in reading Terry's, I'll say, email letter. I didn't have any comfort level of what she was going to cover.
Right.
Whereas the previous contractor was very specific, and I'll say that I had a reasonable expectation that would be the subject, at least for the first retreat that we would engage in. Not that the DISC is bad. I don't know how many times I've taken it throughout my career, and it's always useful information. But
maybe we could save money and just get a copy of yours.
I work my way towards center point. But if we want to do the DISC, that could take, with discussion, 2 hours, which is half the session. Would we be doing justice to the other areas, which I think are very important too? And I think back to the training that we received when I was in the Transportation Commission, the annual training that they did, where they ran through what I'll say, the rules, the procedures, the applicable laws, and basically how we should be conducting business. And doing that may be useful for the board, since we have a lot of new members since the last time we've done something like this. And then perhaps as a second opportunity for some engagement with the board, we may be better prepared to engage in sort of the DISC type discussion where it may be more meaningful.
Sure.
I don't think the DISC is bad. I'm not sure whether we can cover everything in a half a day and still have a foundation of what some of that material is that I think the board should have to operate efficiently.
Understood.
I gotta agree 100% with Stephen. I mean, I think it is important, especially because we do have so many newer members, that they get a pretty big picture based on transportation and what we do specifically. And then, maybe devote the second half to team building or just getting to know each other. It almost seems like staff could facilitate this. I hate to throw it back on them, but I mean, the prices for the other two are, to me, outrageous. Especially for a small board like this.
Well, Josh, is there, but since Terry, I don't want to get too far ahead of us, but since Terry proposed $1,000 and Steve is kind of offering that we have two, is there room, opportunity to have two different retreats? One focused on what he shared, kind of like the operational piece, and then second with the team building? Or flip?
Budget, yes. Available time from the board, probably no. That's where we tend to struggle.
It'll take two interventions. If they're spaced out, or we did it as extended board meeting or something.
Right.
Just alone.
I might offer that maybe it's valuable to emphasize and for me to go back, if we're on a general consensus that it is okay to refine with Terry a more a comprehensive kind of approach, maybe to speak with her about doing that individual work with you all outside of the retreat on a one-on-one basis, which she's done with my team, and you know, any of them, including myself, could speak about, maybe to where you spend, you get her, you know, she gets a half-hour phone call with you, right? To kind of get all the bases covered before you get here. And what we do in our team meetings, for example, and it's something that we do every time our senior management team changes, I always make sure we come back to this, is that there's then a conversation that is had with each individual, right? To understand, what does that mean? What is the dynamic? What is this? And what are we trying to accomplish? I think all the facilitators, including her, emphasize it is important to have a conversation with you all independently ahead of the retreat regardless. And part of that is to seek out and understand, one, what do you hope to come out of the retreat with? Two, what do you think of the strengths that we have, the weaknesses of the board, and anything that, you know, we make sure we cover, because we want to make sure that that limited amount of time is used as best as possible, to your point.
Yeah, that approach you just described was similar to the one that I used when I ran an executive retreat at my former agency, where everyone did it individually. They got feedback from the person administering it. But we came back as a group and we did a scatter plot of where everybody lied. And of course, everybody was guessing, you know, who's up there and that's got to be so-and-so here. But it depicted the general, you know, behavioral and communication profile of the group, which through a very abbreviated facilitated discussion enabled us to use the skills or use proper skills to deal with the feedback that everyone receives. So tying those together that way, but having, say, that work done individually may be a good approach, so that we don't have to take up a full meeting as a larger group to go through,
Sure.
I'll say, the nitty-gritty of the instrument.
Yeah.
Can I ask that? So when I looked at it, I mean, when I've worked with facilitators in the past, I've found that after you've worked with them, you can kind of throw together something because they have an understanding of how you work. And it often is less expensive than somebody you haven't worked with because they don't know what they're getting into, versus sounds like Terry has worked with you and understands, right, understands the organization, which I really appreciate. And I think that brings a lot to it. I certainly appreciate the cost. I like the idea of having the one-on-ones, but it seems like, just based on cost, she sounds like the right person to me to bring on. She knows she's the lowest cost. She knows Dash, and sounds like she's willing to kind of shift in the agenda to help us get to where we want to be and think about how we want to spend that time to make it most valuable for everybody. So I like the approach of doing the kind of the one-on-one ahead of time. And I would just say, to me, she seemed like the right person for a number of different reasons. And I wasn't really thrown off by the lack of, you know, the full pretty proposal, because I think that shows that she kind of understands what you're looking for and how you operate.
I think the other way, I mean, the manager knows what we're looking for and he knows her. And I feel like you're telling us you recommend that she is the right person to accomplish what we're trying to achieve.
I think so. Yes, absolutely. And I do think, I appreciate both your comments and all of the comments. I would like to assuming we have the, the consensus that we have, then spend the next couple of weeks absent of the holiday to tune this, right? So that when we come into January, we can kind of really approve sort of our agenda, right? My goal first was to agree on a person and a personality and the approach. Secondly was then to get those details, which I appreciate there's a desire to have those as well. Yeah. I believe, yeah. I don't need a formal motion. I would just need a general consensus and approval for us to proceed in developing that. And I would probably have some additional conversation with David as chair to make sure we also sort of capture those details with him. And, the expenditure is obviously a low expenditure and within the bounds of our budget. So there's nothing outside of the ordinary happening there.
I'm comfortable with that approach. I mean, I was very interested in Terry when we had the Dash emerging leaders program come. And if you remember, some of them spoke about the program and they just said, "What did you like about it?" Terry Glass. And, that was very telling to me that she really has a way to captivate. And you only have a few hours with someone. So I think that's good. But I do also like some of the other suggestions. There are specific legal issues or other kind of compliance issues that we need to look at as a board just to make sure we're comfortable with our role. I mean, that's something we should have those conversations as well. And have someone like Lonnie, who is very familiar with how we work and with our, the laws here locally to facilitate that as well. So let's keep that on the, that may be something that comes out of as we have this retreat about what do we need to be more effective as board members. That might be something we can look at and get some feedback on that as well.
Understood. We'll take.
Come to a meeting,
Yeah.
and give a little
Yeah.
legal update.
Charge us though. It's not free, but
Let them know we're still here at least.
yeah.
So it sounds like general consensus, okay to proceed in refining this with Terry, and then I'll come back in January with sort of a final agenda. And we will emphasize the importance of scheduling a one-on-one for you all to have that opportunity to talk through things with her. Okay.
That sounds good.
Thank you. I will turn it over to Edward.
All right, thank you. Good evening. Going to give a quick budget update and year-to-date position update. Year-to-date, we have experienced a deficit of about 291,000 with a projected year-end deficit of just over 1.1 million. Before I get into fuel and lubricants, I'm going to talk briefly about the operations overtime, just because I think that segues nicely into kind of the presentation Kevin had given and kind of elaborates on some of the impacts of the overtime we're seeing. So operations overtime still is a budget issue, and it's a pressure on our budget. Some of the things I want to highlight with that is we project 8.5% cost overtime. Year to date, we've experienced 25% operations overtime. We have, with preliminary November results, which we are not final yet, we are seeing an improvement there with sort of the bid that Kevin had mentioned. So we're seeing that go in the right direction and some of the new hires that we're bringing on. But year to date, we are at 25% overtime costs. And some of the things that, well, yes, we have some savings from vacancies as far as benefits. One thing that should be considered is Dash gives an 8% retirement contribution regardless of what to put in, and that's of pay. And so when you're getting 1.5 times pay, that's an additional 1.5 times retirement contribution. So the budget right now does not show an overrun in retirement costs, but at 8%, if overtime doesn't come down, that's looking at about $100,000 overrun in retirement costs. So that's kind of one of those indirect implications of overtime as well that I wanted to highlight. Getting into fuel costs, that continues to be our largest budgetary pressure. We're looking at almost $1 million year-end projected budget overrun. As has been mentioned in previous months, our budget target was $2.40 per gallon. Through October, we saw $4.30. That has come down I'm hesitant to take the projected number down too much just to hedge against any further rises, but we are looking at about $1 million with that price point. An additional budget pressure that has emerged is maintenance parts and supplies. Currently looking at a projected overrun of about $220,000. Some of that can be attributed to tires, which are tied to crude oil, but a large part of that is parts separate from tires. Through October, the parts budget is already 70% through its budget. A lot of that, I've met with maintenance, and finance is continuing discussions with maintenance to further dive into this. But some of the preliminary discussions have highlighted supply chain issues that has led to difficulties in getting parts. It has also meant that sometimes the cheapest parts won't be available for several weeks, and so you can't have a bus sitting out. So sometimes we have had to go for the more expensive parts just to get the bus back on the road. So that has emerged as a budget pressure in the past couple months, and it's something that we're working to discuss and identify what we need to do and what the full implications of this are and how we can bring those costs under control.
Edward, can I just provide a little additional context for the board on that particular issue? We have a limited number of suppliers available to supply for the vehicles. And most notably, for example, the engines in our buses, there's only one manufacturer of diesel engines in existence for transit. That was a shift that occurred, within the last 7 to 10 years. And that's really hampered things. But to Edward's point, he's not only had the conversation with the team, but one of the things we've also been talking about, and I think you've been looking at, is how to make sure we're recovering any warranty related expenses. There doesn't seem to be indication that we haven't, but maybe going back and trying to go after some reimbursements for anything that might have fallen within that purview. And then hopefully for the team to also be able to look at strategies involving our parts inventory. And I don't know whether you have anything to say in regards to that, but thinking about what are the parts that we're needing that are having these long lead times, and there's a potential to stock on those so that they're in stock. Because I think one of the things that Edward mentioned that struck me when he was briefing me on this issue is that you could get a part for cheaper, but the bus will be down for a month. And when you have a limited fleet availability to begin with, and you can't afford to not have that vehicle running because now all of a sudden you're not going to be able to meet service requirements, it's kind of really tying our hands in that regard. I hope I said that right.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, we're having that conversation on, the possibility of stocking up on specific parts if needed.
So I just had a question about the electric vehicles and maintenance. So I know most of our electric buses are obviously newer. And I'm assuming more of the maintenance repairs are with the older buses, and the electric buses are under warranty. But as we shift to an all electric fleet, my understanding is that electric vehicles typically need less maintenance. Is that correct? And will that eventually help with our maintenance budget over time as we make those shifts?
That is my understanding, that they need less maintenance. And as we expand that would, yes, that would come into play. That's years down the road. Right now we have 14 electrics, and so yes, but it's a long run solution. Yeah.
What's the warranty on?
Ray can help me here, but I know it's bumper to bumper for the first year. It was 3 years.
So the warranties on the bus varies depending on the components, body, frame, chassis, brakes, engine, transmission. Each of the subcomponents have different warranty periods, and we typically speak those with these procurement aspects as we take what we can learn from our spending and then feed that back to are we best bring up money to buy a little more warranty here, knowing that we're going to make better on it versus taking the system. So it's not a straight one-shot answer, but it varies between 3 to 6 years on most subcomponents, and then that's some structure wise.
And electric buses, to your point, don't have an engine and emissions, which most of the time the buses are down is because of emissions related issues.
So we're in the 6th month of the year. Actually, this is through 5 months. And what we would typically be asking a department to do is what are your options for, I get most of this is out of your control. It's pricing, it's supply, but what we'll need to see for the manager and for going forward, because presumably council will be asked to make this up at the year end. So what we really should see is if you had to close this gap yourself, what does that look like? What changes to operations, what changes to routes, what are the options out there so people can weigh basically the cost of not finding $1.1 million at the end of the year.
So internally, we have started to look at any discretionary spending that we can do. Obviously, our discretionary spending as a part of our budget is very limited already. So that's not going to come up with closing that gap. We haven't really explored, and nor do we really want to explore any service cuts. But that is as far as working with OMB to figure out how to fund that gap. That's something that conversations are beginning. But I am meeting with all of the various departments to kind of look at their budgets holistically and identify, where we need to tighten things and whatnot.
Kendall, what would you suggest from a timing perspective for us to bring something to the board, maybe in the form of a document or sounds like some sort of a letter or something that helps to kind of just say, here's where we are, here's what's the trajectory. If nothing changes, here are the assumptions, and then here are the possible scenarios under which we would be having to come to the board to talk about if we were, to your point, being asked to make up that difference, not via a supplemental appropriation. Is that timing January? Okay.
Budget will come out in February. Those
Mhm.
conversations that are going on. That's the other piece. If there's talking out both sides of my mouth, but if more funding is needed, you want the conversation to be had. I mean, because last year was $1 million. This year we're looking at $1 million there, and there was a lot of current service adjustment this year, but you want that conversation to be happening at the same time.
Right.
And so, January back to the board, February to OMB and to the manager. The next supplemental appropriation ordinance will be in March.
Mhm.
And so all of that is kind of the next 6 months on the city side.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evan, what's the app? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Edward. I'm sorry. What's the absolute, what do we pay for electricity each month? I see it in percentages.
So that
is it like 25,000 or?
So that kind of segues nicely into my next slide, but I can get you the exact, before I get there, the exact figure on kind of per month cost on electricity. 20 averages right about 25,000.
More per year than we are in fuel.
No, significantly less. Sorry. And so actually the next slide that I have, last month I was asked about kind of utility costs, what makes up our utility costs. And so I kind of broke that down by electricity is our largest utility cost. It's 82% of our utilities, and that's cross-charged by the city each month. And so they apply that, they divvy that up against all, parts of Alexandria, and we get our bill applied to us. But I also looked at an analysis. It was asked, are our costs increasing because of electric buses? Is that the biggest driver of our cost increase? And so I took this analysis of looking at our monthly utility costs going back several years, and then took the Bureau of Labor Statistics Mid-Atlantic cost per kilowatt hour, and kind of put those two next to each other on a separate axis to answer the question, are our costs rising with kilowatt hour, or are they rising faster than kilowatt hour because we have more electric buses? And it really shows that the biggest driver of our cost increase is the cost in electricity, not our use of buses. Obviously, they do play a part, but we more closely track the overall cost of electricity.
appreciate that because I think I asked that, but my other concern was the city or electric contract goes up in prices. We use more to sort of disincentivize. Whereas I think that we need to be the opposite because we want to encourage electric buses to be more cost competitive. So is there a way to get the city to work its contract with to get their power from?
So I think that's an answer that's a bit above my purview, but I mean, it's, you know, I think it's something worth bringing up to the city, but it's something well beyond there.
There's got to be a way to not make our rates go up more.
Where does that live within the city? In cities?
We're about to have a new office of climate action.
Okay,
And that's in Bill Edgar and General Services.
it's usually in that area. Okay.
Are we doing a lot of our charging at night too, when, overnight, when rates are, we're getting lower rates?
I think we charge at night in the middle of the day too, right? Oh.
I mean, we had talked to Dominion when we were talking about kind of bringing power to the site and looking at expanding our electrical capacity and what our needs are. There were options for, if we pay more upfront, then I think we can have lower costs over time versus having Dominion do more on the front end, but then we're more tied to their cost structure. So definitely things we can weigh, because if we can get more capital, which a lot of times capital is easier to get with grant funding, and bring in, you know, do our upgrades ourselves, then we could potentially get lower rates from Dominion. But I think we went back and forth on that, looking at Ray, but we. Mhm.
We'd love to put a big solar farm over top of Dash. It just costs a lot of money to do, you know? Yeah. Yeah, we've tuned that down a little bit. We've managed to find out some strategies. Thanks to the grant, actually, one of the grants we're going to talk about later.
All right. Final slide I have is just the overall kind of year-to-date position that I went over. With that, I'll open it up to any additional questions on any of the things that I've covered or any overall financial position questions. Seeing none, I'll turn it over to Martin. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the board. Hope everyone is having a good start to their holiday season. I know the hour is getting a little late. I have 4 items on the docket tonight. The first 2 are informational. The second 2 are action items. So I'll try to make sure that we get through the first 2 items relatively quickly and leave time for discussion on the action items as needed. Feel free to take advantage of the cookies and everything if you need a little extra fuel to get through the last bit here. I know. Save the best for last though, right? Not quite. At any rate, so got some good news to share tonight. And okay, forgot we didn't have the ridership item on here, but the ridership update is that it's continuing to show great signs. We had 372,000 boardings in the month of October, which again was one of the highest months we've had in the last 7 years. Again, we just got the November early data, and same story. It's a little bit lower because it does dip in November, but it's still tracking above anything we've seen for the month of November for the last 7 Novembers, basically. So really good news on the ridership front. Second item is the annual fare free report. So as we all know, we went fare free back in September of 2021, which is the same day that we transitioned to our new Dash network. So we are just over a year in now. At the same time that we launched that fare free program, the board also adopted a fare free framework that some of you likely remember. As part of that policy, the fare free framework, we required that we would provide an annual report on the program to summarize how it's doing, any challenges we're facing, successes, issues,
all that. So this constitutes that annual report requirement. We're basically looking at 4 main performance metrics that kind of help quantify how well we're achieving the goals of the program. Ridership being the big one, but also customer feedback, operator feedback, and budgetary impacts. And some of these items that I'm going to go through, you've already seen before, specifically ridership and the customer survey. So I'll kind of move through those quickly and try to highlight the newer information. I'd also note that the full report is available in your packet. We also have a fare free page on the website, dashbus.com/free. Reports on there as well if you want to take a look. So ridership, as I've mentioned, going extremely well. Historic growth in the last year, the first 12 months. We are, as far as I know, one of only 2 agencies in the DC region that are now above pre-pandemic ridership levels. Fairfax Q being the other one, also fare free. Biggest increases that we've seen are over middays, evenings, and weekends, off peaks, so kind of benefiting maybe the non-traditional commute crowd, other non-work trips, those types of things. The overcrowding issue, which we talked about earlier, we are continuing to see that on lines 31, 35, and 36, particularly during periods when we have a lot of student activity, before and after school. So, as we talked about in the report, we are doing some things to mitigate that in terms of the vehicles we deploy on those routes, and in limited instances, being able to run extra trips to help add extra capacity. But, we are very limited in our ability to do that just due to cost and labor required. I think kind of responding to the question that was asked during the public comment period by Mr. Durham, we are continuing to see the problem. I think right now we're working with ACPS as best we can. I know Josh has talked about meeting with the superintendent. We've got some new leadership with ACPS that's just started in the last month. And I think we just set up some meetings to meet with them within the next few weeks to talk about kind of, compare notes and talk about how we might begin to address some of these issues, not just in terms of overcrowding, but also some of these behavior issues as well. So we've always had a good relationship with ACPS, and we hope to do so with some of the new leadership there that's come in. Already seen that one. Customer survey, I know we talked about this a couple months ago, but in terms of the context of free fares, our survey, which was issued back in August, around when it was conducted, 71% of riders indicated they are riding Dash more because it is free. And when you look at just the low income respondents, it goes up to 80%. So definitely seeing a response from those parts of the community in terms of the benefits of this program. One of the things that I thought was most interesting that came out of the survey was that 22% of our riders have started riding since the new network and free fares were implemented. So 1 out of every 5 Dash riders is new. And when you look at their responses on the survey in terms of what factors are influencing their ridership, it's increased frequency is the biggest one, and then free fares is close second. So those are kind of the 2 big factors that we've seen. Improvements in perception, so that's always a good thing and part of what we wanted to achieve with the program. But then again, we do have some concerns with overcrowding and some concerns about feelings of safety and comfort to a limited degree. And this graph just kind of shows the factors that are most important for the customers that are riding more. So again, free fares is basically the second most, with increased frequency being the highest. These are just some questions that we asked in the survey about customers to agree or disagree. As we mentioned, over 70% are riding Dash more. They agreed they're riding Dash more because it's free to ride. About 67% have said that free fares improve their perception of Dash service. So good news there. In terms of some of the challenges with free fares, we've talked about this a little bit, but basically about 34% agreed that their bus is sometimes too crowded because it's free to ride. So that's kind of getting at the overcrowding issue that we're seeing on certain routes at certain times of day. But again, over 50% disagreed. In terms of free fares having a negative impact on feelings of comfort and safety while riding Dash, again, about 30% that agreed, and that may be, a lot of that is to do with the overcrowding, the ridership, potentially some of the students and their behavior, but then the vast majority disagree with that statement. So kind of going a little bit further on some of those items, we've got customer complaint data over the last 15 months. You can see the green star and all these graphs show when we introduced free fares in the new network. So you can see that we did have a spike on the left side in the orange graph. There's customer complaints by month. We did have a spike in complaints in that first 2 months of the new network and free fares, but then it decreased significantly back to normal levels. So good sign there. On the right side, you have 2 graphs showing the number of negative passenger incidents. These are tracking incidents with passengers that involve passengers that were either unruly, disruptive, or potentially intoxicated. So we have seen some uptick in that. We actually did not track this data prior to the pandemic, unfortunately, so we don't have like a baseline. But I think just generally speaking, during the pandemic, people were more on edge. So we had more incidences with this where negative interactions occurred with drivers or with other passengers. But also I think a lot of the just additional ridership, just more people together in small spaces and perhaps more students as well have contributed. But if you look at the bottom right graph, actually normalize it against ridership. So to the extent that the additional incidents are described or attributable to increased ridership in general, you kind of see it kind of flattens out a little bit, especially when you remove the left side, the first few months, which were during the pandemic.
And what constitutes an incident? Is it where a driver asks for supervisor intervention, or is it self-reported by the driver? Or is it customer complaints of an incident? How do you track when one has occurred?
That's a great question. I think it's usually, and Kevin could probably answer better, but I think it's when it's reported to dispatch and the supervisor has to be sent out to address the situation.
It requires a report to go into our system, so that's
Okay. I mean, your operators triage a lot of stuff that thankfully doesn't have to get escalated, that probably would, affect maybe another rider's perception of safety or comfort, but the operator's able to kind of take charge of that. So, I wonder if there was another way you could kind of then have drivers, like we used to do with safety, like near misses or something, just to even get a sense of what's, happening out there. I don't know, just a thought. I mean, it makes sense, and it was something we anticipated could happen based on fare free, and happened frankly before we were fare free too. So
yeah, and I would just the last note on this is that a huge credit to our training department as well, because they do a lot of the training of new operators and refresher trains for other operators, and they have once we started free fares, they adjusted their program to kind of deal with these types of incidents a little bit more, and they're continuing. Actually, they're revising the program for next year. With some of the lessons that they've learned. So hopefully it's kind of an iterative process where they'll kind of keep providing the tools the drivers need to navigate these types of things.
Can I just add, I ran into the transportation director from the city of Fairfax, and she just had like nothing but praise for the dash trainers that came out to the city of Fairfax to train their drivers, because they've got a smaller fleet and they don't have the resources. And she just said it was such a great training. And so I just wanted to make sure that everybody heard that.
Yes. Credit to Stephanie and her team who did that on very short notice.
Yes, and unfortunately, they are not here because they are currently working, but we will pass that along. And we shared that as well with them. We're looking at potential revenue opportunity in the next level. Yeah, so looking at, we're looking at unique ways we become a training center.
Solved all our problems. Okay, operator feedback was the next metric. We conduct operator surveys on a regular basis. We conducted one about 3 months before the free fares and a new network, and then one 6 months afterwards. And kind of compared the results. Generally, operator feedback has been positive, especially with the elimination of fare collection responsibilities. We have kind of a comparison in terms of overall job satisfaction. It went up by 4% after free fares in the new network, and perceived safety while onboard dash buses also went up by a slight margin. We did see a decrease in the percent of operators who agreed that most of their interactions with passengers are positive. It was about a 5% decrease down to 89%. So still a very high number that are saying that their interactions are positive, but it did decrease from before. So that lines up with some of the stuff we just talked about. And I just have a table here that shows the actual numbers. And then just the last metric we have is the budgetary impact. Obviously, the biggest impact is lost fare revenues. However, that has been largely offset by a couple factors. One is we had an increase in our city subsidy during FY22. That was the initial funding source. And then we were successful in getting an award from DRPT, a large $7 million award over the next 3 years. So that has also offset our lost fare revenue. We've also found cost savings in several other areas, terminating cash collection contract with Brinks. And then the Dash Bus app, we discontinued that since it was mainly for fare collection, and then reduced labor for fare box maintenance. That'll continue to generate more savings, and annual smart trip contribution. Once we remove the fare boxes entirely, we will save, I think it's what, $65,000 a year by not having to pay that. And then the biggest one is that we have not had to pay the large we have not had to implement the large capital project to replace the fare boxes, which are actually well past the end of their useful life. Some of those fare boxes are over 20 years old, so they're not long for this world. So just very high level, I would say overall, we've had a very successful first year. It's achieved the goals of increasing ridership, providing more equitable access to transit, and improving the perception of Dash overall. Positive customer feedback. There's a lot of good, we had quotes from customers in the report that were really, really great to read. Positive feedback from operators, and grant awards and other cost savings that helped us to offset the financial impact. So that's the last slide I have on the fare free report. Happy to take any questions.
Hi, Martin. So I just want to tell you guys that I really appreciated reading the report. I don't know if it's the urban planner in me, but I just had a good time reading it. Lots of good information. I want to say kudos to you and your staff and whoever else was involved in putting it together. It was well written. It highlights the successes that we've had over the last year that you all should be very proud of. And thinking about the overcrowding issue with respect to the kids, I think it's great that students are riding the bus. They're becoming early adopters to transit. Hopefully, transit will become a part of their lifestyle going forward as they become adults, and it'll impact their decisions with, SOV usage. I do hope that we can, when you guys are approaching ACPS, that you're looking at it as an opportunity to partner and share resources, and not these kids are a problem when they're misbehaving on the bus, because there could be a lot of synergy there with finding some shared resources with hopefully decreases in the yellow buses, so that some money can come back to Dash to help support the work that you guys are doing. So good job. And I think I'm really excited to be a part of this board, because you guys are doing great work. And I'm really excited about the work that you are doing. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot. And I would just say I was really excited in the Twitter world to see Jordan Pascal tweeted about us, which he never tweets about us. He only tweets about Metro. So I said, and it was a good tweet. It was a good tweet. And so, I saw that, and even was sent by some of my friends. They said, Jordan Pascal's tweeting about Dash. Some people who are on Twitter are like, who's that?
Well, I was actually going to ask. I don't know who Jordan Pascal is, but should I?
It's a well-known figure in this region for talking about transit and Metro, and I think didn't he interview with NPR about the new general manager? I mean,
Is he? Oh, he's a journalist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. Oh. Okay. Cool.
I mean, the press release, I think, what went out yesterday or the day before, and they quickly grabbed onto that and we're talking about it.
Alex now did an article on this as well. I wanted to ask Martin, just with the school, actually, I recently had a day off and I decided to go to Chinkopin, and when I was timing my departure, I thought, well, school gets out at 3:30, and I thought I would catch the last bus before they had dismissed, but I guess they have a staggered dismissal and they start dismissing early, and I'm standing at the stop in front of the high school and I see the students streaming out. So I'm like, should I try to get on this bus at the front, or do I wait like a half hour for them to clear? And it was, so I rode, and I ended up getting on that bus and the sea of students. I have to say, I mean, they were most of them were absorbed in their own personal electronic devices. The bus was very crowded. We were really kind of packed in, but there was not actually even a lot of chatter among the students. They were fairly subdued. And it's interesting, maybe when there are smaller groups of students getting out, maybe I hear them more because they tend to be having more conversations, or maybe they're re-energized because they've had a little bit of time since class. But it wasn't a bad ride. It was the most crowded Dash bus I've been on in a long time, which actually is not a bad thing. But I did want to know, have we looked at, in terms of like express buses that may run just between, say, King Street Metro and the high school, just to do some short runs there? Or when you add a bus, are you then covering that entire trip to Nova and then into Old Town? Because it seemed like not everyone, but most of the students got off at somewhere in between by King Street Metro or some of the stops in the neighborhoods leading up to that from the high school. So it seemed like you could serve a lot of them, but have some shorter trips there that might deal with some of that. And I don't know if that's something looked at with operations.
Yeah, and actually I think we do a version of that. I believe that the trip that is leaving the school going east in the PM on the 31 actually stops at King Street most days. So it kind of is, it's an extra bus not scheduled. And I believe unless there's passengers that are going beyond that. It usually stops at King Street. Is that correct? Okay, yeah, and so that helps us contain costs a little bit. And then I think the 36, we also had some service on 36, and I believe that one doesn't necessarily go to the end. It goes drop off only. Is it kind of, is that how it usually goes? It goes all the way to Potomac Yard? Okay, so now that's true. They go to Arlington, that's true, yeah. So we do, I guess we do to the extent possible, but that's something to keep in mind.
So the ones that are unofficial are doing that shorter. It sounds like on the 36 you're not, because you've got a lot of students in the neighborhoods all along the RIP. But on the 31, it does seem that there are fewer students who go all the way into Old Town, that, you know, you could certainly easily force a transfer at King Street Metro, because there's a lot of other service if they are going beyond that, either the trolley or the connecting service on the 30. But
Right.
so you are doing that, or?
Yes, so
Okay.
the 31 trip does usually end.
Okay. The one that's not scheduled, and then you just run that for like a couple hours, and then.
So that's just one trip.
Just
and
one
that-
trip,
that's-
okay.
That's timed to coincide with the exact moment we get that big rush of students
Okay,
coming out. I think
okay.
it's actually like 3:10 or something like that, so. you
I
might
must have
got
missed,
caught
I
up
think I got out there like 3:18, and I could
Yeah.
start to hear we're dismissing students, and I didn't realize they dismissed by last name too. It sounded like based on what floor, and because I could hear the announcements actually outside the building, and I just could okay, they're gonna be here in like 2 minutes. Is this bus gonna? Like, well, as I said, it was fine, and I was glad to, I wanted to actually have that experience, because I wanted to better understand what were some of the challenges that our operators face in dealing with the crush of all those people leaving at one time. But yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, the routes that go by there, the 31 runs every 10 minutes at that point, and the 36 is at 15 all day. So we have pretty good frequency
Mhm.
for the scheduled service, and then we have the extra trips.
Yeah, that's good to know. Okay. Yeah. Great.
Well,
you.
I'll be talking to Beth tomorrow about ordering your chair of the board dash vest for you to wear when you
I don't-
end up on the bus full of students.
I don't think it would have impressed it. Actually, the only thing that was a little strange is the person who was sitting next to me got up and basically I didn't sort of say anything, just sort of stepped over me to get off the bus. But I guess kids just, their communication is different. And I was just, because I was like, oh, you're getting off here, I would have stood up, but it was fine. So I guess, yeah, you could have sent me a text. That's right. So, but yeah, I do echo Brandy's comments and the rest of the board. This has been a great success in the program, and I'm glad we have ways that we're tracking that success, and also really surveying our operators frequently to get feedback from them routinely, because that probably helps them feel more engaged in some of the decision making as well. So going to the other report we had about what helps people stay here too, I think that speaks to our culture. So thank you, Martin.
The last two items are both grant and their action items. We are entering grant season for FY24, so this is our first batch of grant applications. The first one we have on here is the I-395 Commuter Choice Grant Program, which is managed by NBTC. We've been very successful with this one over the last few years. It's currently funding major improvements on both our 35 in the West End and our 36 AB, which operates between the West End and Potomac Yard. So we are putting forward 3 projects this year. The first 2 are extensions or continuations of the existing improvements. So those are our top 2. These are mentioned. These are listed in priority order. We have to, when we submit, we prioritize projects, and they score that accordingly. So we've got the first 2 are our existing projects, which are the first one is for up to 7.5 million for the 35. The second is for up to 4 million for the 36 AB improvements. And then the third is a new project that we are seeking for funding for to potentially purchase up to 10 electric buses, which would be up to $15 million. The purpose of this one is to add additional capacity on line 35. As we've discussed with the crowding issues, we believe that we could purchase bigger buses. I think we're looking at 5 40-footers and 5 60-footers that we could use on line 35 in the West End on the 395 corridor to help add additional capacity that would kind of meet the goals of this program. And just a couple slides here on the 35. That's the route map there, and you can see the graph shows the baseline ridership, and then with enhancements for weekday, Saturday, and Sunday. So we've seen major increases with the increased service. And then the same for 36. The map shows Mark Center to Potomac Yard via Bradley Shopping Center, passes by ACHS, and runs every 15 minutes all day, 7 days a week. And again, huge ridership increases for this route, which used to be the AT9. Do you want me to stop there or go into the second grant program?
Has everybody reviewed the materials? Because I just think we should, vote for it all and approve it all. Yeah, no, is there anybody who disagrees with this? And if so, I'd like to know why.
I think just for the submissions, you would want two different approvals, one for the 395 set and then
Sure.
one for the DRPT grants. But you can approve them as a chunk, right? To your point, just so that we have those two separate resolutions to submit with the grants.
Could I just ask one question on the and maybe this is to Hillary, on the 395 commuter choice, does the city apply for other, does somebody submit other projects for that funding, or this is our primary use?
No, this is our primary use, and we're submitting it as the city and Dash are submitting these together. So this will also be going to city council in January.
Okay.
Can I also ask, this is all funded by the toll, right? There's no federal funding.
No local match. No local match either. Yeah.
Right, and this is one of the only grant opportunities to offset operating costs. This is a really important one for us. But the focus on capital is also very helpful as we have unfunded capital needs, so.
Yeah, and that's new for us. And I've had some conversations with NVTC, and I think Hillary has too, that they are undersubscribed for capital. Yet our operating program, it's like they're most successful in, but we're also eating up pretty much all the money that's there. So it's like the capital is another opportunity to offset costs elsewhere.
All right, well, I like Matt's suggestion. So why don't we do the commuter choice grants first? Is there a motion to adopt the submission?
So moved.
Moved by Matt. Is there a second? Second, Steve. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? Abstain, okay, noted. All right, and then do we need any, is there a motion on the grants that are going to the DRPT?
I can
D-
go over those
DRPT.
really briefly.
Okay, yeah, I think you should, yeah.
Sure. So there are three DRPT grants that we have here. The first two are under the demonstration grant program, which includes an 80% grant and a 20% local match. The first is an electric bus charge management pilot. Obviously we've got our 14 electric buses and our 6 chargers. This system would allow us to get a lot more data on the performance of the chargers and the performance of our electric buses that we can use to help with our decision-making going forward. And would also help potentially reduce operating costs by allowing us to reevaluate our charging when we do charging to help take advantage of lower rates and not be charging as many buses during peak periods, and also charge buses that need it more immediately if they're about to go back out in service. So it just allows us to be a lot more efficient with our charging. So that's the first project. The second is an automated wheelchair securement pilot. This is a new one for us, and I think we'd be one of the first in the state to do this. But this would be a pilot on 5 of our buses. We would install this automated wheelchair securement system. It's beneficial for a couple reasons. The driver doesn't have to be involved at all. The passengers, with adequate training and outreach, would be able to kind of go into the position and press a button, and the wheelchair would be secured. So it eliminates potential issues with operators who aren't trained correctly or may have challenges with securing them properly. So it's a safety issue. It's also in terms of post-COVID, it's always if there's less close interaction, that's always or usually a good thing. So the training department, safety department has been supportive of this, and we're going to try and pilot it on 5 buses. And then the last one is just an extension of our very successful public transit internship program for 1 position for FY24.
One question on the wheelchair securement. How will passengers be trained or made aware of how this works and that it exists on a handful of our buses?
That's something we haven't talked about specifically yet, but I imagine we'd take advantage of, go to places like the Dash Advisory Committee would be certainly a good place to start, as well as the Commission for Persons with Disabilities, kind of do some outreach events in the public, kind of maybe invite members of the community, some of our typical riders to come and try the buses out. I think we'd be open to ideas as well.
And so WMATA still does all of our regional travel training, correct?
I have not heard much about that program recently. I don't know if others have.
Well, I was just thinking like, if they won't have, this is not something they'll be able to show as part of travel training because it will only exist on our buses and not any of,
Right.
of theirs. So
Right.
I don't know if there's a way to partner with them because if they're the ones who are mostly working with the, disability community on accessibility of transit, it would seem like that would be a natural place people might look to get some training on this, and especially if other systems then start to follow in that vein around the region.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the suggestion.
Have you looked at using video clips to put on the website to show our customers how to use that?
How to use the wheelchair securement? That'd be a good idea as well. Yeah, we could do that.
Most manufacturers actually do. Yeah, maybe a low cost.
Sure. Thank you. Any other questions?
I'm gonna again ask the source of fund. These are FTA funds
This is
funneled through
PRPT.
the,
State, yeah.
but the source is FTA, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know for sure. It's a demonstration project that's funded by the state, but it may be an indirect, so, I mean, if you want to be safer than sorry, that's.
I recognize these, that's fine.
Sure, yeah, they may be, it's that they're the recipient and they're distributing.
There's a federal government for executive branch employees, as I am, Steve is as well. We have restrictions on being able, there's actually a criminal statute that prohibits you from representing a nonprofit or any other entity before the federal government. And so I have actually been very clear when we were going with FTA that applying for money that I can't ever go to a meeting, I can't sign any letters that go to them to advocate for it because actually I could go to jail for doing so. So yeah, it's a good point and something I always look for on the grants to make sure I know the source of the money when I vote on these. So.
Have to perfect it, so jail shouldn't.
Oh,
It's gotten a lot better, I guess.
I'll improve my internet connection, but okay. Well, thanks. That's good comfort. But I think with that, we've probably had enough discussion on this matter. So is there a motion to adopt the grant application, the RPT?
Yes.
Moved by Matt.
Second.
Steve, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Marat's abstentions noted. All right, so we've come to the end of our agenda. If there's no further business to take out, our January meeting, we are going to have one at City Hall. So we'll see you at the council workroom on January 11th at 5:30. And with that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Matt, second. Kendall, all in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned. Good night.